Movies, do you enjoy it more now, or?
I do. I enjoy it. That as much. I couldn't calculate that, but I do enjoy it.
Go ahead. Make my day.
At 95 years old, Clint Eastwood is living through one of the strangest and most emotional chapters of his life. Grief, rumors, unfinished work, and a career so massive, Hollywood still doesn't know what to do with him. This is a man who spent 7 decades becoming the definition of tough. The squint, the growl, the absolute refusal to bend for anyone. But behind the legend, behind all those iconic roles, is someone dealing with loss, aging, and a world that still can't quite figure him out. And somehow, against all odds, Clint Eastwood just keeps going. The man behind the myth. Before we get into the genuinely jaw-dropping details, let's set the scene. Because this story only lands with full force when you understand the scale of what this man has built. Clint Eastwood was born May 31st, 1930, in San Francisco, California. That makes him 95 years old as of this video. And I want to be very clear, this is not your average 95-year-old. This is the man who spent the better part of a century redefining what cool looked like on screen. He rose to fame playing the man with no name in Sergio Leone's iconic Dollars trilogy in the 1960s. Those spaghetti westerns that essentially invented the concept of effortless screen intimidation. Then came 1971's Dirty Harry, and the phrase, "Go ahead, make my day," became one of the most quoted lines in the history of American cinema. But here's what casual fans have always underestimated. The acting was only half of it. Behind the camera, Eastwood was relentless. He made his directorial debut with Play Misty for Me in 1971 and never looked back. Over the decades that followed, he directed more than 40 films, and 2 of them, Unforgiven in 1992 and $1 Million Baby in 2004, won him Academy Awards for both Best Director and Best Picture. 5 Academy Awards in total, 5 Golden Globes, a Screen Actors Guild Award. The National Endowment for the Arts has recognized him as a filmmaker of extraordinary range. From gunslinger epics, to war dramas, to boxing tearjerkers, to courtroom thrillers. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about Clint Eastwood? He never stopped. While contemporaries his age were accepting Lifetime Achievement Awards and giving keynote speeches, Eastwood was still on set, still calling action, still working well into his 90s with the same hunger he had in his 30s. So when we tell you that this particular chapter of his life carries a weight that nobody quite expected, when we say that something genuinely moving is happening, you need to feel the full gravity of who we're talking about. Because what follows isn't tabloid noise. It's the story of a living legend in an unexpectedly human moment. But if he's still this active, this formidable at 95, what is it about this chapter of his life that feels so heavy? What happened that nobody saw coming? Juror No. 2, and the question of what comes next. Let's go back to 2024 because that's where this chapter of Clint Eastwood's life really starts to come into focus. At 94 years old, Eastwood directed Juror No. 2, a legal thriller starring Nicholas Hoult, Toni Collette, J.K. Simmons, and Kiefer Sutherland, and by almost every measure, the film worked. Deadline called it riveting. The AFI Festival selected it as their prestigious closing night film. Critics gave it a 93% certified fresh score on Rotten Tomatoes. Not bad for a man directing his 40th-something movie at 94. Honestly, not bad for anyone. But then came the strange part. Warner Brothers, Eastwood's studio home for more than half a century, gave the film fewer than 50 theatrical screens in North America. A critically acclaimed Clint Eastwood movie was basically shuffled quietly into release like the studio didn't quite know what to do with it. Eventually, the film found an audience on streaming, landing in global top 10 charts across multiple platforms. But the limited rollout clearly left a bad taste for people close to Eastwood. And because of that, questions about his future suddenly carried real emotional weight. Industry reporting started describing Juror No. 2 as the possible final chapter of Eastwood's directing career. Retrospectives appeared almost immediately. It felt like Hollywood had already decided this was the ending. Except Clint Eastwood himself never actually said that. In fact, behind the scenes, sources were saying the opposite. World of Real reported in late 2024 that Eastwood was already looking ahead to another project, describing him as a workaholic who had had a great time making this one and wants to continue on. Sources even claimed cast for a possible next film had already been locked. Then things got weird. Around Eastwood's 95th birthday in May 2025, Austrian newspaper Courier published what appeared to be a new interview with him, featuring quotes about Hollywood, creativity, and refusing to slow down. The story spread globally. There was just one problem. Eastwood said he never gave the interview. On June 2nd, 2025, he issued a statement to Deadline saying, "I can confirm I've turned 95. I can also confirm that I never gave an interview to an Austrian publication called Courier, and that the interview is entirely phony." Later, the journalist explained she had assembled the piece using older quotes Eastwood had given during HFPA press roundtables over the years. Courier's editor ultimately parted ways with her, acknowledging the presentation crossed a line. Still, Eastwood's response said everything about him. Short, calm, direct. No spectacle, no outrage. Just facts, then silence. But the biggest story in Clint Eastwood's life that year had nothing to do with movies, studios, or questions about his future. It was something far quieter and far more heartbreaking. Christina Sandera, a love story nobody fully saw. We need to talk about Christina Sandera because she is at the emotional center of this chapter of Clint Eastwood's life, and her story deserves to be told properly. Christina Sandera was Eastwood's partner of roughly a decade. They reportedly met around 2014 when she was working as a hostess at his own Mission Ranch Hotel and Restaurant in Carmel by the Sea, California. She was 33 years his junior, and from the very beginning, they chose privacy so deliberately, so consistently, that it almost reads as a shared philosophy. Think about what that means in practice. In an industry built almost entirely on visibility, on red carpets and magazine covers, and carefully managed public image, these two conducted a decade-long relationship in something close to silence. Eastwood never officially confirmed they were together. Not once, in 10 years, and yet she was there. She accompanied him to the 2015 Academy Awards when American Sniper was nominated for 6 Oscars. She stood at his side for the premieres of Sully, The Mule, The 1517 to Paris, and Richard Jewell. The photographs exist. The love was real. It simply existed as much as humanly possible outside the Hollywood machinery. On July 18, 2024, 2 days after her 61st birthday, Christina Sandera passed away. She died in a hospital in Monterey County, California. The Monterey County Health Department confirmed, via her death certificate, that the cause was cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, with atherosclerotic coronary artery disease listed as a contributing factor. Eastwood released a statement that was 3 sentences long. He called her a lovely, caring woman and said, "I will miss her very much." Sit with that for a moment. 6 words, "I will miss her very much," from a man who has spent his entire career saying more with less. A decade of partnership. A relationship he never once used as a publicity opportunity. And in the end, a goodbye as quiet and as private as everything that came before it. His son Scott gave a gentle update to People magazine in early 2025. "He's good," Scott said. "He's doing good. He's a survivor, a trooper." He spoke about his father's constitution, formed in the Depression, shaped by wartime, built on a bone-deep belief that you endure. You don't complain. You don't whine. You just do. It's in our blood. By May 2025, Eastwood's most recent confirmed public appearance had been in April, at Jane Goodall's Reasons for Hope event in California. Understated, as always. Present, as always. Moving forward, as always. There is something quietly devastating about all of it. Not because it's dramatic, it isn't, but because grief carried this privately, at this scale, by someone this publicly scrutinized, has its own particular weight. He loved someone for 10 years, in a way that almost nobody knew about. And then he lost her. And then he kept going. There's one more dimension to Clint Eastwood that almost nobody talks about. A side of him that has been present his entire life, that threads through everything he's made. And that tells you more about who he really is than almost anything else. It starts with a record player, a child, and a stack of Fats Waller vinyl. The piano, Clint Eastwood's first and last love. Here is something that should be far better known than it is. Clint Eastwood has played piano his entire life, not as a party trick, not as a celebrity hobby, as a genuine, serious, lifelong vocation that runs parallel to everything else he has ever done. It started with his mother. She brought home Fats Waller records when he was a child, and something clicked in young Clint that never unclicked. "The blues has always been part of my musical life," he has said, "and the piano has a special place, beginning when my mother brought home all of Fats Waller's records." He taught himself to play entirely by ear, sitting at the family piano for hours, running those old 78 RPM vinyls over and over until the grooves went gray, working out the riffs through sheer repetition. "When I was 11 years old, I used to imitate records and try to bang them out on the piano. I drove my mother crazy. I'd be sitting there working a riff over 20 times in a row." As a teenager in Oakland, he was sneaking into jazz clubs to watch the greats perform live. Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Charlie Parker. By his own account, he seriously considered a career in music before Hollywood pulled him in a different direction. But music never let him go. It surfaced throughout his filmmaking career in ways that only make sense when you understand how deep the love runs. He composed film scores for $1 Million Baby and In the Line of Fire. He directed Bird in 1988, a full biographical feature about Charlie Parker, his teenage hero, with a care and intimacy that could only come from someone who genuinely lived inside that world. He directed Piano Blues, a documentary built entirely around his lifelong relationship with the genre. He appeared on NPR's celebrated piano jazz program. And in 1997, at 67 years old, Clint Eastwood performed as a jazz pianist at Carnegie Hall. That last detail, let it land, Carnegie Hall. At 67, after decades of westerns and action films and Academy Awards, this man was performing jazz piano at Carnegie Hall. There's a particular kind of person who carries something like this so quietly for so long, without making it a brand or a headline. The piano wasn't Eastwood's side hustle. It was, in a sense, his first self, the Oakland kid who dreamed of music before the Squint and the Growl and the legend got built around him. And it has remained with him through all of it. Whatever he is doing now, at 95, in California or Hawaii or on a Warner Brothers lot, the piano is still there, still his. So what do you do with all of this? A 70-year career that refuses to end. A decade of love lost in a single July. A musical life that most people never knew about. A man who, at 95, is still showing up. What does it add up to? And what does it actually mean to be Clint Eastwood right now? The weight of living this long in public. Here's what strikes you when you sit with the full shape of Clint Eastwood's life right now. Aging is strange for anyone. But aging at the scale of legend, carrying 70 years of public expectation, 7 decades of an image that the world has collectively decided belongs to them, that is something entirely different. The world wants Clint Eastwood to be an icon. It always has. What it has never been entirely comfortable with is Clint Eastwood being a person. And yet, he lost someone. In the summer of 2024, while a film he cared deeply about was being under-distributed by a studio he'd worked with for half a century, the woman he'd quietly loved for 10 years was gone. There was no press tour for that grief, no carefully managed statement beyond 6 understated words. He absorbed it the way his son says the Eastwood family absorbs everything. Without complaint, without performance, without asking the world to witness it. That same summer, he turned 94. By May 2025, he was 95. And somewhere in there, between the grief and the ongoing work, and the oddly chaotic birthday weekend during which he had to publicly correct a fabricated interview. He kept developing his next film. He kept showing up. Think about what that requires. Not just physically, though that alone at 95 is extraordinary, but emotionally. To lose someone close, to watch the institutional response to your most recent film fall short of what it deserved, to have words put in your mouth by a publication you'd never spoken to, and to respond to all of it with the same economy and discipline you've brought to everything for 7 decades. Not because you're made of stone, but because that is simply who you are. His son Scott said it plainly. He was born coming out of the Great Depression. He saw a lot of struggle. You don't complain. You don't whine. You just do. There is something genuinely moving about a man who has been famous for 60 years and still, at the most private moments, manages to remain private. Christina Sandera was with him for a decade, and most of the world barely knew her name. The grief was real. The silence around it was chosen, and the work continued. That gap between the enormity of the public figure and the quiet dignity of the private person is where the real Clint Eastwood lives. And it is, in its way, a more compelling story than anything Hollywood could have scripted for him. The legacy. What this life actually means. Let's pull back and look at the full picture, because to understand why this chapter feels so singular, you have to hold it against everything that came before. He entered the industry as a contract player in the 1950s, when the old studio system still governed everything. He became a global star through spaghetti westerns in the 1960s. He created one of cinema's most enduring characters in Dirty Harry in the 1970s. He reinvented himself as a serious director in the 1980s, making Bird and White Hunter, Black Heart, when studios expected him to keep churning out action films. He won Best Director and Best Picture with Unforgiven in 1992, a genre-deconstructing western of shattering moral complexity. He did it again with $1 Million Baby in 2004. He kept pushing. Mystic River, Letters from Iwo Jima, Gran Torino, American Sniper, Sully, Richard Jewell, Cry Macho, and then, at 94, Juror No. 2, certified fresh at 93%, and praised by critics as some of his finest work in a decade. That is not a career. That is a civilization. And woven through every frame of it, quieter than the gunslinger, deeper than the Oscar speeches, the piano. The music his mother introduced him to in a Depression-era living room. The jazz clubs he slipped into as a teenager in Oakland. The scores he composed for his own films. The Parker biopic. The Carnegie Hall performance. That thread runs unbroken from an 11-year-old hammering out Fats Waller riffs to a man still sitting at the keys at 95 when no cameras are rolling. There is something in that image that feels true in a way that the legend doesn't always allow for. The man with no name. Dirty Harry. The director. The Oscar winner. The icon. All of it real. All of it earned. And underneath all of it, still, the Oakland kid who fell in love with the blues and never quite fell out. A new film, by all credible accounts, is in some stage of development. No confirmed title. No announced cast. No release date. Just the workaholic, still working. The man who has never operated on anyone else's schedule, still refusing to. We want the farewell. We want the speech and the bow and the curtain call. But Clint Eastwood has never given the world what it wanted on its terms, not in 1971, not in 1992, not in 2004, and not now. What he's given instead is the work. Film after film, decade after decade, on his schedule, in his time, for his reasons. And maybe that refusal to perform the ending, to give us the goodbye we think we deserve, is the most Clint Eastwood thing he's ever done. What stays with you when you look at this chapter of Clint Eastwood's life is how deeply human it is. A 95-year-old man who has never stopped creating, who loved someone quietly for a decade and lost her in a single July, who was born with music in him before Hollywood ever found him, and still has it, still carries it, long after the credits have rolled on almost everyone else, who responds to a chaotic birthday weekend with a single calm paragraph to the press, and then, presumably, goes back to whatever he was working on. He has never needed the world's permission to keep going, and he doesn't need it now. If this story moved you, drop a comment. We'd genuinely love to know what your favorite Clint Eastwood film is and why. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we tell stories like this one with the care they deserve. We'll see you in the next one.